All right, everybody, welcome to Genius Call number 4 with Jasmine Xu. This is DeFi for beginners. Jasmine works at Meta by day, but is a Genesis member by night and probably sometimes during the day, but she's a resident DeFi expert and a great trader, and I've learned so much from you over the last several months, so I'm excited for you to kind of onboard our pop community into DeFi. Let's go.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to walk you guys through the high-level agenda and goals for today. So this deck is, there's a lot. Like, I think there's probably like two major categories of today's deck. The first one is sort of like, if you are a total beginner, you've never heard about DeFi, or you're really learning about it for the first time, there's just a high-level overview for what DeFi is, a couple of really easy examples where if you don't want to think too hard about it, like this is how you get started with DeFi. The second part of the deck, I personally think is a lot more interesting. If you kind of like enjoy DeFi, you're like, oh, this is kind of fun, I want to go look into it more. I think that part is almost like the equivalent of the like teaching you how to fish part, right? Like if the first part is just telling you, here's how you go do XYZ things, I think personally the second part is more interesting because it's like, now let me give you some frameworks for how you can take this to the next level. And so the second part gets a little bit denser, but this is recorded. I'll share out the deck afterwards. And so if folks want to like look at it afterwards or ask questions, like, feel free to go do that. So at a really high level, basically what I'll be walking through today is just like, what is DeFi and a couple of examples, a framework for how you onboard into DeFi if you're looking at different chains, and then a couple of examples of like how one might get started with like, I call them lower maintenance strategies versus higher maintenance strategies. And my goal for you guys at the end of the day, kind of like I just said earlier, is one is just giving folks this high level understanding of DeFi if you've heard about the term but you don't know what it is. And the second one is giving you that framework for your own adventure, right? Because I think at the end of the day, like this type of stuff is a lot more rewarding if you learn the methodology yourself than if someone just tells you like put your money in a protocol, because there's so much more nuance beyond that. So to kick it off, I'm just going to go through just really high level what is DeFi and a couple of examples of it. So DeFi, as you probably know, stands for decentralized finance. And it basically refers to this ecosystem of financial institutions like lending, borrowing, and trading that is built with blockchain technology and entirely decentralized. So as you guys are probably familiar with TradFi or traditional finance, that is basically the fact that that's the banking system that we use today. We give our money to the bank does a bunch of stuff with our money, and like sometimes you get a little bit of yield back. What is really interesting with DeFi and what blockchain technology has kind of enabled is the fact that like you don't need that centralized entity to kind of do all of that stuff for you. You can theoretically trust smart contract code, and obviously it's not perfect all the time. And the smart contracts have different rules written in for what will happen to your money. And I think at the end of the day, a reason it's been very attractive for a lot of folks is because either you can think about it as like you get better yields relative to what you get in traditional finance, or if you already have crypto exposure and you just want to kind of like gain extra liquid like benefit on top of that, like that's how I'd kind of think about it. So the entire DeFi stack is like very complex. This is just like a brief screenshot of what the Ethereum DeFi map looks like. And what you can kind of imagine is the different parts of DeFi are building out these different primitives in the financial ecosystem, right? So like there's trading, right? So the ability to like swap tokens back and forth. There's the ability to have like stable coins, which is where you can kind of park your money from some volatility. There are oracles, which tell you what the price is for different coins, et cetera, et cetera. And basically every single part of that traditional finance ecosystem is in that process of being rebuilt into the kind of DeFi ecosystem. So at the end of the day, like the reason I'm really excited about DeFi and why I think it is at least worth learning, despite the market conditions right now, I'll probably acknowledge a little bit of that as we go, is one is if you already have crypto exposure, then I think it is super useful to sometimes just gain additional yield, right? So there are easy things you can do where let's say you're already holding Ethereum, you can stake it somewhere and earn 5%. It's not going to like make you super rich or anything, but if you're already getting exposure there, it's kind of nice extra interest. And the other one that I just think is like interesting and amazing from like a real world utility crypto standpoint, it's just that like, you can send money internationally instantaneously with super low fees. If anyone has ever had to transfer money internationally, it's a huge pain. You can also borrow money without KYC. There have been a lot of these crazy stories of like folks who've been able to get loans, despite the fact that they were historically working and like maybe unable to get those loans. So just to like give you guys a couple of examples, this is the one I was saying about like sending money. This was like the thing they used for the Luna bet once upon a time. And you can see that someone sent $1 million for literally about $3 in fees, which is just something that like wouldn't happen in traditional finance. Stable coins are really important parts of the ecosystem. And if you are doing a lot of DeFi, I think you'll have to learn how to trade and swap into stable coins. And you can really think about them as like a way to park your money away from the volatility of crypto. Now, we are in a really interesting state. And I think DeFi and crypto right now, where like, I don't know, like every kind of stable coin has its own issues. And so generally the way I think about it is like diversify across a bunch of them, so you never kind of put all your eggs in one basket. This is also kind of the point I was alluding to earlier, which is like borrowing markets are really amazing. So the fact that like, you know, you can go out there with your crypto, like if you don't want to go sell your crypto, but you want to go access some of that liquidity, then you can go out there and like take a loan out. And like people are able to do this way more efficiently than relative to traditional finance. And then this was the thing I was talking about earlier around like easy yield. So the concept of staking, right? So usually what that means is like you are putting your money into the DeFi ecosystem and letting your tokens like help validate transactions on the network. We will go into some of the cons. It's not perfect right now, but these are certain different types of yields for very common layer one tokens. And then the other thing, I'm not going to go into like a lot of detail here because I think liquidity pooling is like its own kind of beast, but I highlight it here because I think it's one of DeFi's really interesting 0-to-1 innovations. And basically what this means is like when you are buying tokens off of like Coinbase or something, it's a centralized finance exchange. They run an order book for how like trades occur. DeFi is amazing because it is literally like people like you and me putting our tokens into this pool, and we are incentivized to do so because there's some type of reward or percentage fee of trades that we get. And that is how a lot of these DeFi liquidity pools, and that's where the term is from, generate yield and allow for you to basically swap tokens. The reason liquidity is kind of the most important thing and why a lot of these different DeFi protocols are like basically paying you to park their money there is because they want to limit the kind of slippage when you're swapping coins. And what that means is like, you know, in this particular example, MIM and USDC are technically both stable coins, but they're obviously, I pulled it on like two different places. You can kind of see there's a slight difference in the rate that you will get for the trade. And so a lot of kind of the magic of things like Curve or the magic of DeFi is that ability to limit that slippage and try to get you as close to the one-to-one as possible. Oh yeah, I see that. I think Brian is going to do something deeper on liquidity pooling. I think I want to flag it here because I think it's a really interesting kind of valuable use case. And when you think about yield, it is actually one of the better ones. But the reason I'm going to opt out of it for this particular conversation is because I would classify it as more in the medium and advanced bucket, where if you want to be lazy about your DeFi strategies, then like you shouldn't do this because it is a little bit more higher maintenance. But I think it's something worth at least being aware about. So the second part of kind of this, what is DeFi? This is what I mean by like easy mode DeFi strategies is I'm going to give you guys two examples of, I feel like I don't want to use the word safer because the ecosystem, like the crypto ecosystem on a really macro basis is fluctuating so significantly. I don't think anything is safe, but you know, I think this is a good time for everyone to like study DeFi, understand these principles. You can try these things out on cheaper chains and get comfortable. And like when the market is in a healthier, better state, like that's when it might be better to deploy your capital if you want to be more conservative. But historically, one of the really common like DeFi things that a lot of people recommend is staking ETH. We all like ETH. We all want to go stack it. And one of the most popular ones is this one called Lido Finance. So what you can see here is basically you, I'm going to assume everyone here like knows how to set up a wallet and put ETH into their wallet because all of you guys have like a POP token. But basically you can take the ETH in your wallet and go stake it in there. And I think it always feels really scary when you do it for the first time because you don't know what's going to happen with these buttons. But it's not like super difficult. When you go to lido.finance, you click stake ETH, you click the submit button to do it, and then you'll see a transaction that you have to go approve. Theoretically, when you do that, you're going to get the equivalent one-to-one ratio of stake ETH. The rationale for that is like when the merge occurs or whenever the merge occurs, you will be able to redeem your stake ETH for whatever that new amount is. However, this is where there's a little bit of a caveat. If folks are following DeFi right now, one of the things that you've probably seen is that like the staked ETH to ETH peg is not one-to-one. Now, should it have ever been one-to-one? Like, I don't know, it's a little bit debatable because basically what it's saying is like you can stake, but then you can also pull out your liquidity. And so that's partially why the ratio doesn't necessarily have to be one-to-one. But the reason I call this out is because, for example, if you wanted to stake in Lido right now, like staking directly on Lido Finance might not actually be the most efficient way to kind of get the most stake, like STE for thing for your buck, because you can go onto Curve or something like that and actually swap it for more. I would say in general, like if you're long-term bullish on ETH, like this could be a good time to do that. Personally, like I'm not really deploying anything because I think there's a lot of stuff going on in the market where it's really hard to know like exactly what's going on. So I would rather just wait it out. But I think, yeah, because I'm sharing this deck later, I've linked a couple of resources. So if folks want to like dig into that more or chat more about it, like that option is there. The other example that I'm using here is called Stargate Finance. So Stargate Finance is one of these like bridge protocols that basically lets you move your tokens from one chain to another chain, right? So if you believe that in the world we're going to live in a multi-chain world, it means that you're going to want to move your tokens from one chain to another chain. When that happens, I alluded to this term slippage and wanting to get like a 1-to-1 ratio as frequently as possible. So Stargate is this really kind of neat protocol where you are able to basically swap your stable coins from one token to another token. What is also kind of neat about why you would do this is if you basically put in USDC right now, you can see that I think the range is like 3 to 8% APY. And so again, like if you're just holding cash right now, there's a way to park your cash somewhere and just get a little bit of yield on top of that. In this particular case, they pay out in the Stargate token. Some hardcore DeFi farmers will kind of, and the term farming kind of comes from like, you'll get these tokens and some people will choose to sell it off immediately for cash to de-risk volatility. Some people will choose to hold it if they believe in kind of the protocol. My general stance on this, and I'll cover it at the end with like best practices, is like, you'll see high yield sort of everywhere and you shouldn't chase it, because at the end of the day, like a useless protocol is still a useless protocol. Even if it's like 500% APY, like a useless token is still useless. And so I would personally like do this stuff for protocols you already believe in, right? Don't do it because you see 500%, because a lot of those numbers also don't always hold. And so it can be very risky to like go through the effort of like moving to a bridge, moving things into the right currency. And so you want to be a little bit thoughtful and nuanced about how you approach it. And I'll go into that a little bit more later as well. And for folks who want to like tactically know how to get started with Stargate, I've sort of listed out the steps and examples for you. What's also neat about this one is if you can figure out how to bridge your money to an alternative layer one, I find that it's a really good easy mode kind of DeFi practice thing where like, I remember when I was learning about DeFi, like I didn't know any better. Someone was like, try putting $10 into something and see what happens. And so I put $10 in, not really realizing it took $50 to get my money like in and out, and it was totally not worth it. And so I often advocate picking your L1 chain of choice, whether that's like Phantom, Avalanche, Aurora, whatever it is, and kind of practice these different mechanisms, because the concept of like adding your money into a pool, staking those tokens to get yield, are concepts that are basically being translated and copied across every chain. And you don't need to spend like $50 per transaction to learn how to go do that. So specifically on the Stargate side, in this example, you can add USDC. When you add in this case, $10 of USDC, you get 9.98 LP tokens. And then you go to the farm afterwards, you stake those tokens. And I think for this pool I chose, it was 5% APY for a little bit of extra yield. So just to recap all of this stuff in kind of the part one, DeFi basically creates these entire financial ecosystems in the absence of a trusted party, because blockchain technology keeps this immutable record of transactions. The interesting kind of use cases that I get really excited about is cross-border payments with limited like fees and also no time lag. The ability to kind of borrow outside of the confines of the traditional system where you have to fill out a bunch of paperwork, and also the ability to kind of just earn this extra yield on liquidity that you may already have exposed to crypto, because like, why not? If you're going to hold this, you might as well put your capital to work. So I'm going to now transition over to the second part. And I think this one might get, this is where I think I sort of ramp up a little bit quickly. And so if stuff doesn't track here, like feel free to ask questions, and Chris can kind of bubble it up if there's a lot of them. So this part I think is personally a lot more interesting, because I feel like what we just walked through was sort of like, what is DeFi, and like really high level basic things that you can do with it, right? So the interesting thing about DeFi is like, if you can figure out the right framework for thinking about the space, it's not very hard, honestly, to like ramp up on any chain, right? Basically, these same DeFi primitives are being built out on every single chain. And so it's up to the DeFi explorer to basically figure out what chain they want to use. And if they have conviction in that chain, consider putting their liquidity on that chain and earning that extra yield. So what I've kind of proposed here is a really simple framework, because I would say this is not the hardcore version. Like, I don't mess around too much with leverage, but there are folks who are really good with all of that stuff. But the way that I kind of break it down is like, there's a couple of these primitives that are just going to be everywhere that you'll have to probably interact with, right? So stable tokens, like this might be how you move in and out of the chains, or it might be how you move in and out of volatility on different ecosystems. Exchanges are obviously super important, because if you're farming, you may want to sell off the reward token, or you may need to swap tokens around to get into a farm that you want. Staking, which we just talked about, a way to help validate transactions in the network. I often like it as a way to, I use the terminology single-sided staking. And basically what that means is you can put your token into a pool and earn yield on it, as opposed to liquidity pooling, where you're putting two tokens in and you can potentially suffer from impermanent loss, which basically means that you would have made more money holding the tokens than like farming it for DeFi is kind of the fundamental risk for that. Borrowing networks are also really important. They're a place for you to deposit collateral to borrow money. The reason I bring this up is as one thing that I've kind of learned from a lot of folks in the space is that it's borrowing that kind of really starts getting the TVL, or total value locked flywheel, going in DeFi, because as you can imagine, people start getting pretty nutty with the amount of capital that they go in. And so oftentimes that can be a signal for like how quickly or not the ecosystem will grow. Yield farmings, we just talked about the liquidity pooling. I cover it, I mention it here because I think it's important for your framework, but we're not going to go into details here. And then I leave insurance there because I think like technically insurance is good for protection against hacks. It's not really there on a lot of the other like smaller L1 ecosystems. And I would even argue like it's questionable like how good they actually are about paying you out if something goes wrong, but like worth kind of thinking about. And basically what I typically do is like, I just gave you a sample here of like how I mapped it, even in my own DeFi, like these were notes I took for myself, right? Like I remember I heard about Aurora. I thought it sounded really interesting. And so I was like, all right, let me like take this framework. I'm going to go do some research, and I will walk you guys through the example with Aurora so you can see how this kind of works in action. And then once you kind of understand the overview of the ecosystem, you can make the call on like whether or not you want to go farm it. So basically the way that the steps that I kind of think about when you're making this decision on whether or not you want to go do DeFi on a particular chain is the first step is you just map out the players and understand like where they are in the ecosystem, right? So that's basically like you take the grid that I just showed you guys and then you fill out all the different things and just make sure you know what the ecosystem looks like. Then the second step is just like start playing with a couple of protocols to understand how things work. And the reason I flag this out is because oftentimes this like feels terrible, but like not all of these protocols are reliable. Like I have gotten into situations where I put money in and I just couldn't get it out. Not because I think they were like actually trying to rug me. I think it was just like these things are new, they're janky, they're not always battle tested. And so I always recommend trying with small amounts of money just to make sure withdrawals, deposits, all of that stuff actually works. And of course, like definitely test on cheaper chains. Like don't waste money on ETH. Just pick any chain that you like and you can do all of these things for significantly less money. Then the third step is basically, you know, if you know the ecosystem, you're kind of confident that stuff works, building out kind of your, like, think about it as your like information flywheel for how you're going to keep up with the ecosystem, right? Like the reason this second half of the framework of this, I guess, presentation is kind of more about this medium to, I don't want to call it like, it doesn't feel like it's quite advanced, but it's definitely higher time maintenance than the previous one, is because if you are going to farm on these higher risk, higher reward chains, like you do have to pay attention to some of the like information narratives, how to check token prices. And so there's some tips I have for that. And then finally, like you have to make a personal call on like if this makes sense for your portfolio and risk tolerance for actually farming or not. So no worries if this doesn't quite make sense. I'm going to walk through every step with examples of like how you would do this if you were starting from scratch today. So I used Aurora as the chain because I think this was the chain that like I personally used. I remember when I was building out this framework and like thinking about how to learn this space. So the first step, as I mentioned, was to basically map out the ecosystem. And to do that, I really like DeFi Llama. DeFi Llama is this awesome resource where they do a really good job compiling all of the different DeFi chains out there, showing you where they are in terms of like total value locked. So that's the amount of money in the actual protocol. And you can also filter it very efficiently by different chains. So in this particular example, I went to the Aurora chain and then I looked at all the TVL stuff. And I took a screenshot of basically the top 10 protocols that I see there. The reason I only did top 10 here is just because like there's like, I don't know, there's like 100 of them or something like that. But you'll see really quickly in TVL, like really significant drop-offs. And like, I don't know, you're probably not going to trust your money with like the 100th chain on that list, but you might trust it with something in the top 10. So I was like, all right, cool. These are the ones that I feel the most comfortable with, like in this like highly risky ecosystem. Then the second thing, so I guess on the first thing I told you, you look at it on DeFi Llama, then you can take all of those different protocols, start exploring them, looking into them, and then you can map them into this ecosystem. So in this particular case, I found out that stable coins that are used in Aurora are USDC, USDT, and USN. The primary exchanges are Trisolaris, Synapse, Rose, Nearpad, and Wanaswap. So just to kind of make sure I bridge like the how I got there, basically, I clicked on every single one of them and like went through them and made sure that I understood what it was, and then I mapped it against that. So like the two borrowing ones on there were Bastion and Origami, and yield farming in this case were Vaporwave and Bluebit. And basically, the yield farming, what this means in this case is like when you put money in certain exchanges to earn tokens, you theoretically have to go in and claim the tokens every day. And so there are solutions, in this case, I call them yield farming solutions, that will effectively automate that process for you. So they will automatically claim the tokens and sell it. And so you earn money faster. There are cons to them, but like this is kind of what the ecosystem looks like. And I think you can also kind of like derive some sorts of insights when you look at this slide and the previous one. So the ones that like I personally looked at I was like, okay, so there are a bunch of exchanges on this ecosystem, but if you look at this carefully, Trisolaris is like way bigger than all of them, right? So Trisolaris has 54 million in TVL. I think Synapse is on there, but it's not exactly like an Aurora native exchange. But like, let's see, there's like Rose, Nearpad, Wanaswap. They're so much smaller. And so if you're thinking about like, I like this ecosystem, I want to go farm somewhere, like my guess would be Trisolaris is probably safer than some of the other ones just based off of how much TVL that they have. This one's also kind of interesting. Synapse is like technically a bridge, but it's also like pretty high on this list. I didn't expect to see that. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I didn't realize Synapse had gotten quite so large. And then the other one that was kind of interesting was I really like single-sided staking because I try to not suffer from impermanent loss. But I couldn't find anything super obvious for Aurora. In this particular case, I think Aurora you can stake on the near chain, which is like a totally it's like kind of a separate chain. So I was like, okay, cool, that's interesting. Then the second step that I talked about is like you start playing with the protocol. And basically the functional things that you want to go test are how to get money in and out. So that is, I think, on the bridging side. So like, can you actually get money without like major slippage issues? Basically what that means is like, you don't, for example, if you want to put in $100 into another chain, you don't want to only get like $50 out, right? Like that's really unfortunate. And so you want to just kind of test all and make sure that all of that stuff works out well. The other thing to always look out for DeFi that like I sort of forgot about when I first started was what's the actual native gas token. So like this happens to people a lot. They're like, okay, cool, I want to go farm my ETH somewhere. And so they move their ETH over, but maybe ETH isn't the actual token for gas in that particular chain. And so I'd always recommend like moving over the gas token first, because otherwise like you just can't do anything on that other chain. And then the second thing I would test for playing with the protocol is, what do you actually do with your money, right? So like figure out which protocols look interesting, and then you can test some small deposits and withdrawals just to make sure that everything is actually working. So let's see. So in this particular example, I took a screenshot of like two of the big kind of exchanges here. So there is, oh, interesting. I wonder why it got flipped. Okay, I don't know. That's interesting. Okay. Well, basically this is like the left one is yield from Trisolaris and the right one is yield from Rose. In this particular case, I was basically looking at what the APRs were and like whether or not I was interested in it. I deposited some money to play around with everything and make sure it worked. Specifically things you want to test. For example, this is a USDC wrapped near pool on Trisolaris you would put in a test amount, like you can put in $2 or something like that, just to make sure that everything works. And these are functionally the types of things you would look at. One heuristic that someone has given me before is like, if you want to be more conservative, even when you're like doing a little bit more of this, like a higher risk farming, is that you potentially look at pools that have at least 5 million in TVL. That was what one person used. Like you can figure out what your personal thresholds are for like the type of risk that you're comfortable with. So after you test something and assume like everything is working as intended, then I kind of think about it as like, what is that information workflow that you want to go build to figure out whether or not this actually makes sense for you, right? So there are certain tools here where there's a tool called Dex Screener. So I think a lot of us are probably familiar with like CoinGecko or CoinMarketCap. But the thing is, when you are doing a lot of DeFi stuff, these tools tend to be like these tokens tend to be so new that they don't get listed on those exchanges yet. And so I remember when I first started farming on Aurora, I was like, oh my gosh, I like can't find anything. This is super annoying. And the other thing I didn't realize was like liquidity on some of these new chains is actually very low. So I remember at the time, like I really wanted to find a specific token and I just couldn't figure out how to match the token correctly. And so I did do a little bit of sleuthing on Dex Screener to figure out how I could actually get into the position. Then the second step here is just like, let's say you've looked into the protocols, you feel pretty good about them, then you might want to start mapping out the total value locked in different pools and the potential APYs to figure out which protocols make sense for you. And then the other kind of tips here are like creating a Twitter list. So what I'll also do is like, if I want to farm a specific chain, I will just make a list and kind of start following different influencers. Like you won't exactly know who's right or wrong, but like take it as like a bunch of information that you have to go filter through. And the other like pro tip I kind of have here is that it makes a lot of sense when you say it out loud, but like, if you join the Discord for a specific protocol, you have very good strategies on the protocol and on the chain. And it kind of makes sense, right? Like if someone cares enough to go hang out in Discord for Trisolaris, then they're probably just going to be really big fans of Aurora. And so, yeah, they'll talk about Trisolaris, but they're also probably going to go talk about like Aurora chain stuff. And so that's kind of I feel like a tip that I typically like using when I'm like, okay, I'm farming somewhere new. I kind of want more alpha because my friends aren't talking about it. Where can I get more information? And then assuming you've done all of that, then I think the question is like whether or not investing for you makes sense, right? And so on a very high level, like if you oversimplify, and when I share out this deck, you guys will be able to click on all these links. I wrote this one out, I think, as a mirror post a while back. But basically, the way I think about it is like there's strategic questions and then there are tactical questions, right? So on a strategic level, like what is the ecosystem protocol and narrative? How's the team for the specific protocol that you actually want to go invest in? How's the product? And then what is the quality of the community? Are folks is the team like responding to feedback and all of that type of stuff? And then I also bring up tactical questions because I think one thing that I often think about is like, it's naive to believe that like you should just go farm the thing today, right? There are like legitimately better times to enter into positions versus other times. And so one thing that I'm still trying to get better at is like, even if I decide that something is the right protocol for me, like for example, if you had started farming these protocols now versus like 6 months ago, you're probably getting like better returns now. And so we can't always predict the macro market conditions, but like definitely be thoughtful about what that looks like. And then, of course, think about what your expected time horizon for investment is, right? Like there's very much for people who are really into DeFi, they will chase different narratives. You can kind of tell when like crypto Twitter gets really hot in a particular ecosystem and you get really strong yields. But what happens after that doesn't mean that the protocol is bad, but maybe you have to stay there a little bit longer. So know whether or not you are farming for something for like a 1 week or 1 month period versus a 6 month period or something like that. And then the other kind of like personal notes that I would suggest to anyone that's like thinking about this stuff is one, everyone's tolerance for risk and reward is super, super different. And so I think that's where it's often, I think, very difficult to say like, do X or Y, or like, this is definitely the right strategy, because at the end of the day, the way I think about it is like, you should do a strategy that you're comfortable with, right? If you are getting it, like sometimes I can feel myself getting into a state where I'm like checking the thing every single day, every single minute. And I'm like, this is too much. Like I don't want to spend like 90% of my time worrying about particular positions. And that's a really good sign for me that like, I should probably de-risk that. And that threshold is going to look very different for everyone. So be honest about that with yourself, because I think like that's actually quite critical. And then the other major step is basically like, do you want a lower high maintenance strategy, right? Like the trade-offs as you would expect is like higher reward also comes from higher time spent. You have to stay on top of the narratives. You have to know what the discourse is like. And yeah, you will go earn a lot more. And then the lower maintenance strategy, if you can imagine, is like basically maybe you put it in there, you check it once a month. It doesn't take more than 5 to 10 minutes, but the trade-off is you are going to earn a little bit less money, but maybe it's a little bit safer. So I would kind of think through those different considerations for your personal decision making. So, okay, that was a lot of content, but I'm going to recap everything here, hopefully, so we can kind of make sure we clear on the takeaways. So I think the first one is this is a long list of best practices. I think of it as every mistake that I've made in DeFi that hopefully you guys don't have to make. So first one is, as I just mentioned, figure out your own risk and reward appetite. Like if you get into a protocol and you feel panicked and upset about it every single day, then like don't get into the protocol. Like probably doesn't make sense for you. The second one is like, don't just chase high yield numbers. I used to get caught on this all the time. Like you'll see a new pool, someone be like, oh my God, this just launched. It's like 200% APY on like a stable coin. You're like, oh, this is fantastic. But the reason it's so high is because there's no money that's in the pool, right? And so by the time you make all those changes and you get your money in the pool, that 200% might actually just be like 5%, and it might not be that interesting anymore. And so I often caution from like, you shouldn't just go move to something because you see a big number, unless you're a whale. Like if you're a whale, then, go ahead. But I think for most retail investors, like it's not actually super practical. The third one is that you should farm protocols that you really believe in, right? Don't chase yield. Like if you get a token that is worth nothing and you also potentially get hacked, or the protocol gets hacked, then no amount of 500% APY is actually going to fix that problem, right? So like really think about it as like your liquidity is precious. Like give it to teams that you believe in, protocols that you believe in. So that way, if you are like earning yield on their tokens, you're almost like DCAing into protocols that you already like. The fourth one is this concept of just diversification, right? I think when you I remember actually like back in the day when we thought UST was safe, it was very tempting to put all of your money in UST because you were like, this is so easy. Why wouldn't I go do it? But it is, we all know sort of what happened to Luna and UST. It imploded. And I think the point of diversification is when something like that happens, you should not feel like you've lost everything, right? And so a personal rule I keep for myself is no more than 5% of my crypto portfolio in any one protocol, no matter how lucrative the yields are, just because you never know, right? Sometimes things happen because they're Ponzi. Sometimes things happen just out of bad luck. There are plenty of like well-intentioned teams where they just get hacked or something. And there's no need to kind of put your personal net worth at risk there. Fifth one, like practice on a chain that's cheaper than ETH. Like don't be like me. Don't put like $50. Don't spend $50 trying to see what $10 does. Like pick any of the chains where costs are almost like in the pennies. And that's where I think that's your best like playground for how you get started with DeFi. The other thing is kind of just like remember the context of the macro, right? So this is kind of the point of like, I started farming some pools in December. I probably should have just exited those farms and not bothered farming up until now, right? So at the end of the day, like no matter how good these yields are, like they do move and swing it the same way the macro does, and so that context is important. And then the last one to think about is APY is not always like super accurate, and so I'd be really careful about how you look at it, because I think you see 200%, you're like, that's amazing, I'll double my money in a year. But the reality is that if you look at the APY numbers on a consistent basis for many protocols, they almost never hold. And so the metric that I personally look at for my own record keeping on this stuff is like APR, because that's not compounded, and then I will divide it by 365 to figure out what the actual daily return is. And I think that's usually a more accurate proxy for everything. And then I would be remiss if I did not warn everyone about this, which is DeFi is super, super rewarding, but also incredibly risky. There's like smart contract risk, protocols get hacked, bank runs happen, and all like literally everything. You can go to this website, I think it's like rec.news, and like read about every single DeFi protocol where something bad happens. I think it's one of those things where like, DeFi is like the Wild West right now. And so, I still think it's like super worth looking and learning about. I spend a lot of time in it, but you just have to be really careful about how you manage your portfolio. And the way I personally do that is this diversification point, right? Like no more than 5% in anything, even no matter how good the yields are. And then I will leave you guys with two kind of parting gifts here. So one is a low maintenance like DeFi strategy, and the second one is like some ideas for a higher maintenance strategy. So the super low maintenance strategy, right? We're talking about sub 5% yields, which like you could argue, is that even worth it? Lido Finance and Stargate or Synapse are ones I really like. Do be careful. Obviously, the market is like changing so much. I think Lido is also interesting because I don't know, like a few months ago, I would have felt really confident suggesting it. But now with this whole like ST, ETH, and ETH depegging, like it's really hard to know exactly what the right entry point is. But maybe keep an eye on it if that stuff is interesting to you, if you want to get into that. And then if you want to do this like medium, like higher maintenance strategy example, so this means you're kind of optimizing for yield, you're willing to move capital around, you're also like willing to spend an hour or two just to keep up with this stuff. A couple of pools that I've been in for like several months, which is why like I feel safer about them, are I really like GMX on Arbitrum and Avalanche. Basically, I don't want to call it's not exactly stable coin farming, but their token GLP certainly fluctuates at significantly lower magnitudes relative to the overall market, but it's consistently paid out around like 10 to 30% APY for several months. The other one is, of course, if you really like a layer one chain, you really like their major DEX, decentralized like exchange, you can consider LP pooling. LP pooling typically with two pairs can get you between 10 to 90% APY. It's a lot more complicated, but like it's probably the faster way to earn money on your liquidity. The other one that could be interesting is like Platypus Finance and Vector Finance on Avalanche. They're very similar to Curve and Convex for stablecoins. It basically means that you can put stablecoins in and park it somewhere and get like pretty decent yield. But if you are going to go do like the medium to high risk or higher time maintenance strategy, the thing that I would also suggest is you invest in this like DeFi skill tree, right? Which is basically make sure you understand how to take the basic actions for participating in DeFi. So things like swapping tokens, bridging it to another place, learn about what impermanent loss is, learn about liquidity pooling, borrowing, whatever it is that you're interested in, like learn those like literal tactical actions. Then I think the second part is just getting smart about the ecosystem, learning about what's happening. You can do that via Twitter lists, you can do that via Discord, Telegram chats, etc. Like information is incredibly important for you to kind of make an educated decision. So invest time in that. And the last step then is like pick the L1 chain you like and go through that framework so you can map out like what is interesting or not to you. So yeah, that's it. I will send this link out now that I'm done talking. I've also linked a couple of interesting links here. So one is this thing called Bridgers. It's basically like the best way to bridge between two chains. Multi-chain DeFi yields is going to be a link to DeFi Llama, where they show you the yields for a bunch of different chains, which is kind of nice. The Daily Ape is this kind of thing that Darren Lau puts together. It has like all the DeFi news daily summarized, and it's free, which I really love as a way to like quickly keep up in the ecosystem if you don't have time to do it yourself. And then True Sources of DeFi Yield is a really great article by a Coinbase engineer who kind of talks to you, like, I didn't have time to get into it for this session, but like where the yield is coming from is like really important, right? Like we know that there are Ponzi's and then there are actual protocols that are paying back the revenue to their users. And so it doesn't mean that every Ponzi is bad necessarily, but I think one should know where their money is actually coming from, right? The adage is like, if you don't know what the yield is, then you are the yield. So that is all I had. Happy to answer any questions, and I'm going to send this.
This is great. Yes, thank you. I personally want to do like 4 or 5. Oh, you can hear the echo because if you don't have headphones, or you can
I will
mute for a second. Yeah. I want to do like several of these because this is really valuable. And I've been trying to post a bunch of the links in the chat so people understand where to follow and what to bookmark, but I'm so glad that we're going to be able to get this deck. So with the recording, I'll share a deck. And with that, I think we should just start taking some questions from people. If anybody wants to raise their hand, whether you want to talk more about the frameworks or just where to start or specific protocol or anything you heard tonight, we can jam on.
I had a question, if I can jump in. Okay, thank you, Jasmine, for the presentation. It was really interesting. I've never been into DeFi a lot. I've never really trusted or those yields and interest and all that stuff. But would you say that it would be a good moment right now to, for example, buy ETH at such a low price and start like staking it into something of a safe, stable, low yield return investment pool?
Yeah, I mean, I think again, like safety is very relative in this current market. Like I feel like my answer to this 3 months ago would have been very different than it is right now. And I think most of that is because like Lido is the one that's like very popularly known as like a very theoretically safe staking option. It doesn't mean it's not safe, but I think the thing that you're seeing with this like depegging of like ST ETH and ETH is basically that like, I don't know, like you could stake it today, right? I think I took this screenshot a few days ago, but like you could stake it today and I think like get an extra 6% ST ETH than you would have otherwise. Or like, I don't know, maybe you wait a couple of days and that discount suddenly becomes 20 or 30%. And I think the question is like, how much will that bother you, right? If your thesis is like, I'm bullish on ETH, I'm not worried about like, I don't care about the fluctuations that happen, are happening right now, then like, I would say go for it. The other option, which like, again, I hesitate to say safe because I feel like, Celsius imploding is an interesting sign that, you know, even CeFi is really scary right now. It's like, I personally stake a bunch in Coinbase. Actually, honestly, it's from like when I first started in crypto, and I was just like, it's fine. I'm just never going to get it out, and it's just a long-term investment. And so I would say personally, like I'm DCAing into ETH right now because I'm also quite excited about the prices, but like I just don't think the 3-4% is worth the risk of like a 20 or 30% swing, because I think that would personally upset me a lot. But I think it depends on like what type of risk you can tolerate.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I'll definitely look more into it and calculate my risk. Thank you, Jasmine.
Cool. I see. Okay, difference between swapping and bridging. Okay, so the difference is basically like swapping is, I guess, although technically bridging is a form of swapping, you could argue, but like I should say, bridging is basically saying like if you want to go from Ethereum to another layer one chain, like Avalanche, Polygon, or Phantom or something like that, you have to bridge it over to the other chain. Versus when I've used swapping in today's talk, it's really more about like on a chain when you want to swap like Ethereum into USDC, that's swapping. So think of bridging as like the layering into other chains, and then swapping as just like changing one token for another token on a single chain. I also see, how does one take advantage of the DPEG? If you go on to curve.fi, that is where you can get the top screenshot, and that's basically where a lot of folks are doing the arbitrage right now. I think the question is just that like the number seems to continue increasing every day. So like it's I don't know. I think what's interesting is like we know the known stuff right now, right? Like we know that 3AC imploded, we know that Celsius imploded. We don't know what those trickle down effects are, and so I think that's where I personally get really nervous about making any super definitive moves right now. But Curve would be where you go do that right now.
We have the mompreneur ETH that wanted to come on stage. Okay. There we go.
Hi, yes. So first of all, thank you so much for this session. It's, I think, very important, especially for someone like me. I'm just a long-term holder for crypto. I love the whole concept of the crypto. I believe in it. I have few tokens that I've been I only know how to buy. I don't even know how to sell. So I'm always tempted to get into DeFi. My question is, when we talk about risk, what is the risk of loss? Let's say I want to put, for example, 1,000 into a protocol, and if I lose, what is my biggest loss? And just to know how to start. I hope my question is clear.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think like let's say in your example, like you want to put $1,000 into the protocol, right? Like it kind of depends a little bit on like what goes wrong, which is a little bit hard to say, right? And what I mean by that is like there's a world where let's say you put $1,000 into something, and like the chain gets hacked. Like that's happened to me before, and like then your $1,000 is gone, right? And so that's kind of why I had the earlier point about diversification. So like even if the yield is tempting, even if the thing is theoretically safe, like even good teams can accidentally have bad things happen to them. And so I think of it more as like a percentage type thing where it's like, just, don't go over 5% or whatever that comfortable amount is for you. One could argue like a super, super worst case scenario is like you try DeFi, but you don't try a credible exchange. And then like maybe you accidentally sign a malicious transaction, then it can actually be a lot worse. So like I've heard of interesting cases from folks where like they they were in a protocol from a long time ago, and some type of hack happened. They didn't pay attention. They weren't even in the protocol. But in that hack, they had approved like a transfer of USDC. And so what happened was then, like, many years later, they're in a legitimate protocol that's not even getting hacked. They're just moving money around. And they suddenly realized that when they make the swap, they had this unlimited approval on the token that they have. Yeah, I think someone Will has revoked cash. Like, I think it's very real. Like, if you're someone that's been in DeFi for a really long time, or DeFi and crypto for a really long time, sometimes you just forget about what happens, honestly. And so that's like a super worst case unlucky scenario that I've also heard of. So yeah, I guess does that answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. No, I think the outcome of this is that I need more education to get involved. I just had my Pope stolen in front of my eyes from my wallet, so I would not risk more, especially that I want to do like high and I have high investment, so I'd rather keep them there now. Cold wallet until I learn more. So what would be the best or like way to learn if I want to focus on this for, let's say, a month, just to know everything, to be safe and like use it? Where should I go?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I think one is like, you can probably start off of like I think this deck hopefully should be a good overview for you. So I think you can probably get most of the skills through that. I've also, for different concepts, like linked different articles that I've written. I also am not like the best DeFi person out there in the world. And so, I'm happy to maybe share a couple. I can send some like other folks who aggregate this information really well. Cause I think a lot of learning of the space is like, one, tactically doing it. So, that's within your control. You can like choose a chain, practice bridging, and do all of that stuff for much lower fees. The second one is just like reading and like learning more, right? So like I said, every day, like I spend an hour just like reading these links. There are these like really great aggregators, and you can learn a lot from them about how they think about these different problems. And of course, like I never trust any one person. I feel like this whole space is very psyopsy sometimes. And so I recommend like doing a lot of literature there. But I think if you read this and then you like kind of understand everything that you're reading in some of these aggregator sites, that's a pretty solid start place to be, I think.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I'm a mom full-time in Web3. So all I need is resources, the right resources to read. So I'll definitely reach out to you and I'll go from there. Thank you so much.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely feel free to DM or ping if I can be useful.
Thank you.
Okay. I see I am in a few LPs in the Binance app. But you mentioned I can auto claim tokens. So I don't know how Binance works actually. I don't use Binance. So I don't know. Maybe someone in the chat can help with that one. Typically when actually I should say in today's presentation I only really talked about DeFi, right? The decentral finance part, which is the stuff I think that you are able to do when you like own your own keys. Technically, like CeFi, a lot of these CeFi products also leverage DeFi to get their yields, right? So like one that I've also used out of like sheer laziness is like OKCoin. Technically does DeFi stuff in the background, but I was just like too lazy to move over to all of the chains. And so, yeah, I'm not familiar with the Binance use case.
Well, that was fantastic. I would love to host these more regularly and maybe like build out a whole more DeFi component of education, because that's been super valuable in Genesis, right? That's where like a lot of us have made gains and like protected and hedged against other investments that we had in overall crypto and NFTs and everything. So I would love to actually build that out more. If you want to jam on that, yeah.
Yeah, let's do it. It'll be fun.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for hosting. And this is like something that we are going to continue doing over the next several months. And I know Brian is talking about liquidity pools and some more like a deep dive on one of these like very particular subjects. So if anybody has suggestions for topics, you can post those in the chat. We're also going to post a survey afterwards where you can kind of suggest, would you like to chat more about, LPing? Would you like to talk more about stable coins? What are your kind of areas of interest in this field to kind of gauge where we're at as populars as a community and what we want to learn about? And with that, thank you so much, Jasmine. Look forward to having you back soon. And this was DeFi for beginners.
Thanks for having me. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.